So how in heaven are you? Both of them, probably. Last week, I proposed a pretty radical idea to you, that no one and nothing is against you. We talked about how in life it often feels like things, situations, people are against us, but that when we know the truth of our existence as expressions of God, when we know that there is truly no separation, that we are all one, we realize that it is actually impossible for there to be anyone or anything against us. But we forget this in our humanness. And our feelings of separateness, our need to defend ourselves, our need to be right, it comes from forgetting that truth, right? Forgetting that we're all one. And from not being connected to our own wholeness, from being alienated from our true self. So we talked about how our triggers, when we have reactions to people in conflict situations, that those reactions and triggers are pointing us to where we still are as yet unhealed. The places where we need to work, the places we need to tend to in ourselves. I shared a story about my experience of going through the licensing and ordination process and how I got some feedback on one of my interviews, and it contained some criticism that really got to me, really triggered me. And it was because it was tapping into false beliefs that I was still carrying from childhood. What Charles Fillmore would call error thought. So it was getting at those parts of myself that I had abandoned, that I had repressed, and that were in shadow because they were deemed unacceptable. And the pain that I felt when that place was triggered caused me to need to want to defend myself, right? To start mounting evidence as to why those things were not true about me. Stop smiling, Vicki. But with the help of Vicki and others, I was able to get the courage to begin to face those false beliefs that were etched into my subconscious, and to see that they were just feelings and beliefs, but they were not the truth of who I am. Not the truth of my essential spiritual self. I also did some very intense inner child work, which was very helpful, and began to dismantle those false beliefs. So today we're going to pick up where we left off last week and go deeper into some of these ideas. And I wanted to make sure I plugged the book. A whole bunch of us took the class, but even if you did take the class, you know, it goes by so fast. And this book is one of those Unity books that is just so full. So if you didn't take the class, I highly recommend it. It's like a Unity classic. And not classic meaning from way back, but it's contemporary, but it's one of those ones that everyone in Unity has looked at. And so it's written by Reverend Gary Simmons, who is a Unity minister, and he uses the metaphor of the storm and the eye of the storm to talk about how we can move out of that space of conflict and move into our center. How we can use the inevitable conflicts and interpersonal difficulties in our lives to heal the unhealed places and to grow spiritually. How we can get connected to our wholeness so that we can live from that place and our life will go a lot more smoothly. So Gary explains that conflict is a part of life, and we know this, right? But he says that it arises because we have two competing needs. So there's the human part of ourselves that is all about getting our needs met, feeling safe, and feeling okay. And then there's the spiritual side of us that is compelled by our soul's desire to grow. And so sometimes these two things are at odds with one another. Does that make sense? I had a professor who talked about double vision. So always in Unity, we have to hold that double vision, knowing that we are at once human beings and spiritual beings at the same time. Neither one is more important or more true. They are both true. And sometimes those things are in conflict and there is an ongoing tension. The experiences that we have in early childhood, especially experiences around our very close caregivers, imprint on our subconscious, right? And they create false programming, false beliefs about ourselves. And these create this filter through which we experience life, pretty much. It's our perspective, the filter of our perspective. So human beings are meaning-making machines. We are constantly looking at what is happening around us and creating a story out of it, a narrative from it, making meaning out of all of the things that happen in our lives. And we do this based on how we feel about ourselves. Okay? So we're constantly assigning meaning to everything that happens in our life. And that meaning that we assign to things creates our life experience. So if we feel inadequate, insecure, incompetent, lacking in some way, if we have a belief in lack, then we are going to create meaning from that place. And so our fears and insecurities, our belief in separation, they create a fear response in us. So that when someone criticizes us, or hurts us, or disappoints us, we feel threatened. And we take it personally, right? And we feel threatened, and so we go into fight or flight. We experience what I've heard called an amygdala hijack. And I love this because it really helps to explain what happens to me sometimes when I'm really triggered by things. So I don't know all the science of it, but Jim's probably going to correct me if I get it wrong. Just giving you a hard time. I think the amygdala is the reptilian brain, right? It's the part that's all about survival. And so I feel like I'm a little loud. Am I a little loud? So when we get that place triggered in us, we're not using the rational, frontal lobe or whatever it is. We go to the amygdala, the reptilian brain, and we're acting from that place. And the amygdala literally hijacks like the rest of our brain. This is a real thing that happens. So it's that fight or flight instinct that makes us feel like that thing, that person, that situation is against us. And so we frequently respond by reacting, by justifying, by getting defensive, needing to be right, and the most subtle one, wishing things were different. But our resistance, like they say, resistance is futile. Our resistance only serves to reinforce those false beliefs in our subconscious. It actually makes that pathway in our brain stronger. Not only that, when we get defensive and make the other person wrong, we miss a huge opportunity for spiritual growth. So Gary Simmons says that we need to make friends with conflict. Doesn't that sound like fun? He talks about conflict as being our motivator. He even calls conflict our spiritual midwife. Because it brings us to the edge of our resourcefulness. When we're in conflict, when we're triggered, when we don't know what to do, we bump up against the edge of our own resourcefulness. And when we're in that situation, our instinct is to want to get away from it. It's not comfortable, right? But we know that if we get away from it this time, it's only going to come back around again, right? So in that sense, it doesn't do us much good to resist it because the lesson will come back because we have this compulsion to keep recreating that scenario where we were damaged or hurt in our youth, in our childhood. And so Gary says that we, rather than resist, rather than push that situation away or want it to be different, we need to go to the edge of the abyss and look within. I love that. He says our willingness to look into the abyss places us at the edge of our awakening. Places us at the edge of our awakening. So coming to church and singing songs and all that is great, right? But where we truly awaken is when we are willing to look at the shadow elements, the dark side, these false beliefs that even though we may not even be consciously aware of them, they are running our lives. Because they're creating that filter through which we experience life. And so the edge of the abyss is the place where we stop running, where we face our demons, where we look at the shadow. But the thing about looking at the shadow is once you look at it, it starts to shine light on it. And then you can bring those things up into the light to be healed. So we cannot be connected to our own wholeness, which is what we need to do to be able to live from the eye of the storm. We cannot be connected to our own wholeness when parts of ourselves are abandoned or fragmented. But more importantly, we cannot find wholeness by trying to rid ourselves of the parts of ourselves that we don't like or that we find unacceptable. This only causes more fragmentation. So we live in a self-help culture, right? I'm becoming more and more aware of this all the time. A lot of it disguised as health and wellness. So this teaches us that if we just improve this or that thing about ourselves, we will be okay. We will feel safe, we will feel acceptable and lovable, and everything will be okay. So if we just lose weight, that's a big one, right? Especially in our culture. If we earn that degree, if we get that job, if we find that relationship, we will feel whole, healthy, and worthy. But that's not the way it really works. Those things may give us a certain sense of well-being. But here's the clincher. Our wholeness and our self-worth are not dependent on any of those things. Gary tells us that our wholeness just is. It's not something we have to improve ourselves to get to. It just is. It's our birthright as divine expressions of God, as children of God, as its individualized expressions of divine mind. That wholeness is our birthright. It just is. We don't have to earn it. I like to say God wants us to bring our whole selves to the spiritual party, right? We think we want to bring just the good stuff, the parts of ourselves that are new and improved, the parts that we feel okay about. But God, that force that wants us to express more perfectly, more spiritually, to expand and grow, God wants us to bring all of it to the spiritual party, not just the new and improved stuff. The messy, the flawed, the hidden, the imperfect stuff, that's the stuff that Spirit can really work with. And so in this sense, conflict is an opportunity. Our reactions and triggers are pointing us to where we are not connected to our true selfhood. So we can use these opportunities of interpersonal conflict to see, as an opportunity to see what is repressed in us, hidden in shadow, and to reclaim those lost parts of ourselves. This is courageous work, and not for the faint of heart. And when you're doing this kind of work, it can really help to have someone that understands this stuff and that you trust. It could be your partner, a close friend, it could be a therapist, or your minister. And we can also do this for one another, right? So for me, one of the most healing things I've ever experienced was being able to bring up some of these things that were bouncing around in my subconscious and say them out loud to another person. This is what I'm thinking about myself. It's so shameful. And have that person love me anyway. And we can do that for one another when we're living from this place. This is what a lot of 12-step work is about, right? Admitting your they call it shortcomings, but it's that idea of bringing the stuff out of being hidden and bringing it into the light. And if you can share it with someone you trust and say, God, I have this belief about myself that I'm not good enough, that I'm incompetent, that I'm whatever it is, saying it out loud, sharing it with someone who can support you in that can be incredibly healing. And when we move to our center, we can do that for one another. So in this way, conflict becomes the arena for our spiritual transformation because it brings us to that edge of resourcefulness. And at the edge of resourcefulness, where we don't know what to do, is where we can open up to a whole new realm of possibilities. The place that we find those possibilities is at the center, at the eye of the storm. So if the storm is all of those things that are happening around us, life being in session, as I like to say, then the eye of the storm is that place of calm, peace, and stillness at your center, where you know your truth, where you know what your spiritual essence is as a child of God. So when we make that conscious choice to shift to center, we become capable of behaving differently from that place. We see new possibilities. new perspectives, and we can make new choices. We see things more clearly. So from the eye of the storm, we can see that we are making our own meaning of things, and we can then reframe that experience. So how do we get there? How do we get to wholeness? So Gary talks about moving from perception to principle. So just being aware that we have this filter that affects the way we see everything in life is helpful, because we can know that we never have all the information, and therefore our perception is always incomplete and somewhat inaccurate. We can know that everything passes through that filter, and that filter is only as good as our sense of self-worth. So if we know that, then we can, in those times of conflict, try to withhold judgment, to be open to more possibilities, to be constantly checking in with ourselves and seeing if we need to reframe experience. So moving to principle, in Unity we have the 5 principles. We all know them. So we need to remind ourselves of these principles when we're in those situations. So if we're feeling like someone is against us, someone hates us, someone wants to hurt us, someone wants to take our good from us, we go back to those 5 principles and remind ourselves there's only one power and one presence, and I am an emanation, an expression of that one power and one presence, then we know that no one can hurt us. No one can take our good from us. So we keep checking it out with what we know to be true. And because we never have the full picture, Gary recommends that when you're in a conflict with someone, when someone criticizes you, or you interpret as criticizes or judges you, you can react with, "Tell me more." Can you imagine? Tell me more. Because that gives the person the opportunity to fill in some of those gaps in perception that you have. It's also pretty disarming. When you react by saying, "Tell me more," instead of getting defensive, the whole thing shifts, right? Then we need to move from separation to connection. So Gary says that the most important thing, and we know this, right, is our relationship with God. But our relationship with God, because God is all that is threefold. It's our relationship with others, our relationship with all of life, and our relationship with ourselves. All of those things are comprised of that love, of that relationship with God. So when we're disconnected from one another, it's easy to blame, make others wrong, judge, criticize, need to defend ourselves. But when we're more connected and we're knowing our oneness, we're not as likely to take things personally. Gary gives this awesome example in the book that I just love. He tells about a time that his wife comes home and says to him, "Gary, you never take me out to dinner." So how does he respond? He starts going, but I just took you out on Tuesday. And remember last week when we went out, and the week before that? And he starts mounting his defense of why what she said is not true. But what do you think happened? Do you think that went well? He says, "I won the argument, but I lost the opportunity to give my wife what she really wanted, which was to feel closer to me. It wasn't about the dinner. It was an invitation to connect." I remember I once heard this relationship expert say that every day in our primary relationships, and it could be friendships as well as romantic relationships, there are constantly these invitations to connect. And it's how we respond to those invitations to connect that determine whether we'll go deeper and the bond will get stronger, or whether we will become alienated from one another. The problem is, sometimes those invitations to connect are highly disguised. "You never take me to dinner" might not be the best way to approach, but that's what we all do sometimes, right? To say to someone, "I'm not feeling close to you, I really need you to spend some time and give me some attention," that's hard to do, especially if you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed out. So those invitations to connect are not always going to come in the perfect way, because we're human. But when we're living from center, we can more easily recognize those invitations as what they are. That when the wife was not trying to pick a fight with him, she was reaching out to him for that connection. So the question is, do we want to be right, or do we want to have a more loving, closer relationship? When we react by defending ourselves, we miss that opportunity to connect. Then he talks about moving from defensiveness to non-resistance. So Jesus talked about loving the enemy, loving our enemy, right? So the enemy in this sense is whatever it is out there that we've determined is against us. Those false beliefs, the negative programming. And so we need to love that enemy. So befriend it. Because better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, right? If we can begin to see what those things are that we have dubbed the enemy, and we did this in class, right? We talked about situations. Sometimes we make our body the enemy, right? We do that a lot in this culture. Knowing what those things are that we have made the enemy and loving them. Again, if we only resist the situation, it will only come back again. And finally, we need to move from those competing values we talked about at the beginning, where our humanness and our divineness are at odds, and move from that competing tension to purpose. So I think I started to talk about this last week. You guys know we're not here to just work, pay taxes, and die, right? But we're also not here to achieve accolades, to have success, to make money. Those things can be part of the human experience, but they're not what we're here for. We are here to be the love of God in expression, to be that presence of God in every situation. Gary says that the universe wants to fulfill itself through you as the expression, a more authentic expression of God, an ever more authentic, ever fuller expression of God. He says it's the soul's conspiracy to grow and evolve, to come into greater alignment with truth. And guess what? We all have the same purpose. Underneath it all, we all have that same purpose. And so no one can be against you. How can anyone be against you if we all have the same purpose? And once your soul gets a hold of this idea, it doesn't let go. That's how strong the desire is for God to express through you. So now that we have plenty of food and we're like not being chased by woolly mammoths anymore, we need to get about the business of what we're really here for, right? We're really here for our soul's growth. We may not always be able to do this when we're triggered, but just knowing this helps it to become, like Vicki always says, our default setting. We might not remember it all the time. In fact, a lot of the time we're going to forget. Sometimes I walk out of here and I forget immediately. But that's why spirituality is a practice. The more we come back to that, knowing, okay, I got to do the dishes and I got to raise my kid and I got to do all this stuff and I can get very caught up in that, but what is my real purpose? And so when we're in that situation of a conflict, when we feel attacked or threatened, we can move to our center and we can ask ourselves, what is my purpose in this situation? And knowing that our purpose is always to be the expression of God, we're going to have a better sense of what is ours to do. We can ask ourselves, what am I making this situation mean? So we can check that perspective through which we have filtered everything. What belief about myself is coming up that is making me feel like this situation is against me? And what inner resource am I missing that I would need in order to not feel that that thing is against me? What am I missing? So, am I missing a sense of self-worth, of peace, of understanding, of acknowledgement, of reassurance, of consideration, of rest? And once we see what that thing is that we're missing in that situation, guess what? We can give it to ourselves. We can give it to ourselves. Because I can tell you right now that nothing out there is going to heal you. We can only be healed through the God within. And so we can learn to give what we need to ourselves. Rather than resist and push away the situation, we can move to center. And at the center, we can remember the truth of who we are. And we can reframe that experience from that place. And most importantly, we can remind ourselves of our purpose, to be the presence of God in every situation. Or, as we just sang in our I Am song, and like our mission statement says, to be the hands and heart through which heaven is made known on earth. few moments of quiet contemplation, gently closing your eyes if that's comfortable, beginning to bring your awareness to your body sitting here in the pew, feeling yourself supported by the pew beneath you, supported by Spirit, knowing that you are held in the loving arms of Spirit, right now and always. And so gently relaxing into that place, letting go of thoughts about what's to come next, and spending a few moments just practicing being in this moment. Begin to become aware of the sounds around you. You can hear the trickling of the water, the piano, the sounds of your beloved friends shifting and moving, cars going by. Just open up and allow it all to be present. Knowing that this is the eye of your storm. This is the place of centeredness, of groundedness, of connection, that you, with practice, can learn to live more and more of your life from. Every time we come back to center, we create a pathway that gets stronger each time. And that pathway home gets clearer, easier to find our way. You don't have to spend hours and hours in this place. 5 minutes a day spent in this place of calm and quiet will transform your life in ways you can't imagine. This is the place where we meet our true selves and where we embrace all of it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. The repressed parts, the hidden parts, the abandoned parts. And through the God within, we have the power to embrace and love it all. So channel that love of God right now. You can imagine it flowing down into the top of your head like a light of any color you want. Imagine it just flowing right into you. That love of God that pervades the universe, that is in fact the energy of the universe. And send it now to all those places within yourself. Send it into all the dark corners and nooks and crannies of your mind, where it can light up all those false beliefs, all those hidden parts. Just blasting them with that love and light of God. And claim the healing that is taking place in you right